Hello again, this is Kate Brown Pernia for Why Not a Hat. Today we're going to talk a little bit about millinery trims. I've shown some of these hats before, but I want to discuss in specific the trims that can be used on a hat and how there's really almost unlimited possibilities. The hat that I'm wearing is a freeform blocked knotted sisal, and I wanted to show you the wacky trim that I found. This is an artificial reed of some kind, like a grass, that I found in a craft store in their floral department. I like the quills that a lot of the Brits use on their hats, but they're a little bit hard to come by here. So this is an interesting and dramatic substitute for that. Now, speaking of quills and feathers, this is a favorite kind of trim for me. These are goose biots. They're just jaunty little feathers, and these are pretty readily available in craft stores and even Joann's, I think. What it is a bunch of feathers wired together, and then at the very end you cover it with the material from the hat. And traditionally hats are decorated on the right hand side, but not always. Here's another hat with the goose biots. You've seen this one in an earlier video. But the fun thing about this hat, it's not just the biots that is the trim. If you take a closer look, you'll notice that the denim is separated by a zipper which opens to the tartan fabric, which becomes part of the trim of the hat as well. That was just a fun expedition, I guess. Let me look at this. Here's one of the Springulator hats I showed you before, and this is one of those combo things where you put a little bit of everything on the hat. Some veiling, some eucalyptus, also found in the floral department, which actually holds up very well on hats. And then a beautiful piece, a last bit I had of this beautiful embroidered ribbon. Now ribbon is something that we use a lot in hats. And I showed you this bandeau earlier. We're going to cover this particular type of ribbon trim in a future video. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's not hard to do. I originally found this on a sweater that I purchased from Macy's. I purchased it just for the trim so that I could figure out how it was done. And this is a lot of fun to do. You can do it directly on a hat like this, or you can do it separately and then lay it over the hat. Speaking of ribbon, here's another kind of trim that we will probably also cover in a future video. These flowers are made from ribbon. And it's a twisted rose with rose buds and little leaves made out of ribbon. This is just a purchased hat, but I jazzed it up by putting the special trim on. Now, trim doesn't always have to be something additional to the hat. It can be incorporated in the hat. And this trilby that I showed you earlier, this is a home deck fabric, and I cut out motifs from another home deck fabric and just stitched it on, raw stitch all the way around. Didn't even have to finish the edges. But I think it makes the hat a lot more interesting than just the stripe. Now this is an old hat of mine that I've worn for years and I really love it. It's a Panama straw, but I twirled it with some cinnamon, which I dyed to match the hat. And if you'll see, there's a vintage button on there, and then a hat pin that I made that dramatizes the hat. So that's another option, just swirling it, inventing little loops until it looks interesting. And with cinnamon, you can just roll the edges, or in this case, I basted the edges, the hem, so that I wouldn't have to worry about it unraveling. But it makes it for a nice hat. Now this is an interesting one. This is a hat that I made, and this particular trim I thought was really interesting. And let me show you how I found it. This too was found in the floral department, and it's this big long stick with this straw piece wired around it. And when I saw it, I thought I could put that on a hat. So I pulled the stick out, and this is what happened. So you see, keep your options open. Now, oh, let me show you this one. We talked about this a little bit earlier because of the poly veiling that's on this, but this is an example of a hat that the whole hat is its trim. This is a crazy quilt with a little bit of Swiss lace, some beading, some quilting fabrics, a little flannel, even some embroidery. And then the veiling is another thing that I found in the floral department of a craft store. It comes with white dots, and because there are little dots on the black fabric here in colors, I took some Sharpies out and colored a few of the dots so that it would all blend together. So that's another trim option. Now, here's a fun one. This is a hat that I took a 60s Swiss braid hat and reshaped it into this form, and then I made the poppy on the hat. It's a silk poppy, and I'm going to cover how to make the silk poppy in a future video because it's a lot of fun to do. It's on this hat, and as you see, I've made another one for this hat. Now, one of the hats that I showed you earlier was this one, made from scraps of another hat, a little springulator in the back, and I mentioned the feather that I made out of fabric. And I'm going to show you how to do that today, just so that you'll have something to start with to practice. So let me clear the decks a little bit here. Put my ironing board up. This is a nifty little technique, and it's not hard to do. I have made the leaves on the poppies with this technique, and the feathers, various other things. One of the key ingredients is this stuff called Sew Perfect Steam-A-Seam 2. It's a binding fabric that will make the magic for us. So what I've done is I've made a little pattern for a feather shape, and I have cut 2 pieces of fabric, and I have a piece of the Steam-A-Seam that I've drawn the pattern on. I'm going to take my paper scissors and just cut that out. Now this binding fabric is actually sandwiched inside 2 pieces of paper. So what I'm cutting is the paper on the outside, and the trick is to peel the paper off. So this might take me a minute to get with my old fingers. Here we go. So one piece peels off, and you will see there's a little sticky substance in the middle. So I'm going to lay that sticky side down on my cutout fabric and just press it with my fingers. And now I'm going to try to peel off the other piece of paper and leave the little sticky net on the fabric. And it takes a little skill, but there it is. Whoops, almost. Had it and then I lost it. Here we go. So now, as you can see, there's that little mesh there. Now, before I glue these together, I'm going to take a little piece of black millinery wire and sandwich it in here. Let me straighten it out just a little bit so that I'll be able to manipulate the feather a little bit. Excellent. Just lay it on there, then put the fabric on top. Try to match up the edges as best you can. Now you take your steam iron. I need to let it heat up just a little bit. It's called Steam-A-Seam because you have to use steam for this process. Here we go. And it just glues those fabrics together with the wire inside. Nifty, huh? I'm going to let it cool for a minute, and then we'll just cut the edges like a feather, and we're good to go. Let me get rid of my iron here. So I just slash it. You see what I'm doing? Maybe if I stand up, it'll be easier. And I'm just cutting down to the wire that we put in there. Let me get a better pair of scissors. You need sharp scissors for this process. As you can see, it's feathering out already. Now, I didn't get it trimmed particularly well up here, so I'm just going to make some of those ends more pointed. Sorry for the noise, they're digging up our street again. Just in time for my video lesson. You can have a lot of fun with this technique. Just imagine doing a hat with fall leaves made out of silk this way. That's in my mind. I think I'm going to do that for a fall hat this year. I'm looking forward to the time when we can dress up and go out again and wear our hats. I mean, after all, what's the Kentucky Derby without the hats, right? Just a horse race. So there's one side, you see? You can play with it. Now I'm going to go on the other side. Hope this isn't too boring. Now this, I picked this fabric because I think it'll look snazzy on a black hat. Not exactly a black feather, but birds have such fantastic colorations. It's kind of fun to try to mimic some of their wonderful colors without actually having to kill a bird to get it. Almost done. There. Shake it a little bit, give it a little. Now you can bend this in the shape of the hat, or you can make a whole fascinator with these. So have fun. And why not a hat?